starting. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this opportunity to get into your word again, and help us, Lord, to be faithful with it, eat the meat and throw out the bones. Thank you, Father, for your word, and help us, Father, to understand what it says, what you wanted it to say. And then, Lord, help us to be obedient, to apply it to our lives. And Lord, be with our families and be with all the concerns we have during the week, and help us take Christ to those situations. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're in Luke 15. We got a little ways into it last week. But one thing we've been trying to do, we're in Luke 15, verse 11. We're trying to do is do a little bit of context. And so we asked the question, what is a parable? And a parable is a story that everyone can relate to, that has an ethical question to be answered, and then it has a zinger at the end, right? And it's always a Christ zinger, something about Jesus. That's what a parable is. What is a parable not? A parable is not an illustration to prove a point. It's not an illustration to prove a point. That's not what Jesus does with parables. I had many years where I thought, well, that's what parables really simply is, just proving a point. Jesus trying to make a point. It's not. You know what parable is? An alternate reality that we're invited to join.
An allegory, maybe?
Maybe more of a metaphor. Yeah. When Jesus tells a parable, it's an illustration to point you to an alternate reality. Not just trying to make a point, because all a point would be is just more facts. Here's another way to put it. It's asking us, where do we fit in to this story? Where do you fit in? Where do you go in this story? So in the prodigal son, you have the two extremes. You have the wayward son, who is as far from God as you can be as an unbelieving sinner. Okay? You have the elder son, who is as far, or who is as close to God as you can be, and an unsaved sinner. All right, let me say that again. The younger son is as far from God as you can be, as an unsaved sinner. The older son is as close to God as you can be, as an unsaved sinner. That's really important to see it. That's what Jesus is doing here with this story. Why do we know that is true? Well, the context is verse 1 of the chapter. So let's do that one more time. Verse 1, just so we don't. It says, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to him to listen to him. Why? The last verse of the last chapter, verse 35. It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So why did the tax collector show up to listen to him? What do they have? Well, tax collectors. So if you take the last verse of chapter 14, the last part of that verse, why do tax collectors and sinners keep coming near to him to listen? Why do they do that? What's the last of verse 35 of chapter 14 say? He who has ears to hear. So why are the tax collectors and sinners coming? Because they have ears to hear.
But they always want to hear something.
Yeah.
They can attack.
Yeah. Well, no. Tax collectors and sinners. Yeah. Yeah. So the tax collectors and the sinners keep coming because they have ears to hear. Yeah. So the first verse of chapter 15, they're coming near to listen to him. Why? Well, the last part of chapter 14, because they have ears to hear. But verse 2, the Pharisees and scribes grumble. Why do they grumble and they're not listening? Because they don't have ears to hear, right? So when we're talking about Jesus telling the story, who's he talking about? Why is he telling the story? Who's he talking to? Well, who had come to catch him? The Pharisees. Okay, so now we need to say something else. The father in this story runs to the son. We heard that this morning. Don't have to go back over all that, right? He runs to the younger son. But the older son, at the end of the story, what does he do? He goes out into the courtyard the older son doesn't want to come in, and he goes out to the older son. Okay, is the father neglecting the older son? No. It's the interesting thing is the boy comes from a distant country living in the fields. The older son comes from the fields on his own property. They're both coming from the fields. They're both coming from the same place. They're both in a field separated from the father. They both dislike, hate, they have disdain for their father. Both of them do. Although the older one stays close. So you can't say Jesus he's not telling a parable to say he didn't care about the religious leaders, the Pharisees. He did very much. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. He did what? Gave his only son. For who? Just a few? No, for the whole world. So you can't say that he didn't care about the older son. All right. Now, having said that, everything I have is yours, right? Yeah. So is it a matter of the dad not loving the Pharisees? Because I know this is the only one where Jesus inserts the Pharisee. Remember we talked about, I don't know if those on YouTube, if we talked about it last week, but there's 20 parables from Luke chapter 1950, or Luke 9:50 to 19:27. There are 20 parables, and then the parables end, and Jesus heads to Jerusalem. In the middle of those 20 parables is this parable. So in the middle of this parable, then, the idea of this parable is that there's something for us to see right in the middle of all these parables, and that is this indictment against the Pharisees. Now, everybody calls it the story of the prodigal son. I think we agreed last time that's not a great title for it, because that's not really in the context. Okay, so does Jesus need to tell the tax collectors and the sinners that he loves them? Do they need to hear that? No, absolutely not. He hangs out with them. He eats with them. The reason the Pharisees are so ticked off is that he's with them all the time, right? So he doesn't need to tell them that. So this story's not about trying to get prodigal sons to see they're wasteful and sinners and need to come to Jesus. They know that. Zacchaeus knew that. Zacchaeus knew everybody hated his guts in Luke 19. He knew that. All the tax collectors know that. The sinners know that. Right? You think he had to go to the prostitutes and say, by the way, you're filthy and people don't think much of you? And does he have to tell the shepherds you're dirty and everybody thinks you're the you're the lowest of the totem pole? No, because the reason we know that is in Luke 5. Do you remember the end of Luke 5? You remember what he says? Let's jump back there. I just want you to see when he called Matthew to be a follower. You remember Matthew gets saved, and we'll start. 27. After he had went out, he noticed a tax collector named Levi. He was a thumb breaker, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." He left everything behind. He got up and he began to follow him. Did it take a whole lot of prodding? It's totally different. It didn't take much at all, did it? Verse 29, Levi began, what did he do? He gave a big reception. He threw a party, right? Who did he invite? Well, the only buddies he had would have been other scum, right? So he was reclining at a table with them. So verse 30, the Pharisees and the scribes began grumbling, and his disciples saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" they're going to conclude next. Of course, Matthew 12 is the big, and John chapter 8. That's where they collide the worst. You're Satan, aren't you, Jesus? That's what you are. You are the embodiment of Satan. Beelzebub. That's what you are. Why? Why are they saying that? Because of who he hangs out with. Right? So who is it? So yeah. Mm-hmm. They were just wanting the skinny on him. Yeah, that's what they wanted. So you look in verse 31, and Jesus answered and he said to them, it's not those who are well who need a physician. You see that part? This is a famous verse, isn't it? But those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You can't ask a righteous person to become righteous. That's ridiculous, right? That doesn't make sense. You know, I don't think that makes any sense at all. I'd like to invite y'all to Cedars tonight at 5 o'clock. What? We are at Cedars. That's a silly thing to say. Jesus is not inviting the righteous to become righteous. Now, who's he talking about? The Pharisees. They think they're righteous already. And the Recovery Bible over at the jail, they use a Recovery Bible, and theirs says that he eats, it says, tax collectors and scum. That's the word. That's the idea. They're the gum on the bottom of your shoe. That's who Jesus is hanging out with. Is it because Jesus prefers them? No. But who's listening? Who's listening? The scum. The scum's listening. This is to rock our world. The reason why he's telling this parable, it rocks our worlds. And so, you know, that's, like I said, it's a fire hydrant, right, for us to be able to climb in here. So, yeah. In Luke 5? Okay. Tax collectors and others. Mm-hmm. And you get down to the last line, tax collectors and sinners. Yeah. Uh-huh. Others. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Yeah. How it was reported there. Yeah, we talked about Rembrandt. You know, Rembrandt saw himself as the religious guy because he was so well-to-do, and then somebody came up and said, "Hey," and you'll see it in that book. I read a few excerpts from New Way's book. He wrote a book on that whole idea that Rembrandt struggled with, and somebody said, "Well, I think you're more like the younger son." Really? You think I'm like him? How do people see us? You know, how do I think it's a struggle. Rembrandt saw himself one way, and then he saw him the other, and New Way has the same struggle, the guy that wrote the book. Yeah, yeah. He thought he drew it several times. Have you seen all of Rembrandt's drawings? He did. He changed. It's yeah. He does. He is. Yeah. 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 It's kind of whoever you're talking to, isn't it? Because I know most people I compare myself to, I'm not near as good as they are. Like I'm not nearly as nice. And I mean, there are people that are so kind. And if I'm talking to them, they're going to look at me and say, yeah, you're like the younger brother, right? They're just going to, you could stand to be a lot nicer and better and kinder and more involved in society and better community, you know, socially, you should be out there helping and doing more. And there are people that are doing so much. Then you compare yourself to, say, a Mother Teresa or something that did so much humanity work. I mean, who are we to that? Who are we to her? We're the younger brother, right? We're so self-centered and we're so wasteful. And but yet you could talk to some people and you might be the, you know it all, Mr. Goody Two Shoes. You think you're something special. You're really not. You know, who do you think you are? You churchgoer. You know, you think you're holier than thou. Well, who might say that about you? Somebody that's more like the younger brother. It depends on who you're talking to. So Rembrandt figured out he's all over the board. New Way did the same thing. He figured it out, and so am I. But that's not the point of that's not the parable's point. That's not what it's doing. See, when the problem, what we do is because of the way things work, we generally we apply it real quick. We make application immediately without the interpretation. We can take a basic reading of it and apply it without interpreting it. And if you don't get every nugget that you can get first before you start applying it, you make wrong application. And so what we say, yep, Jesus is saying all the scum of the earth can come to him and be saved. Do you really need to say that at this point? This is Luke 15. Does Jesus really need to say that? You know, I'm over at the jail, and most of those guys are they're in orange. Only ones that aren't in orange jumpsuits are those that are in green jumpsuits. In the green jumpsuits, folks, they have behaved themselves. They're called trustees, and they get to cook. They're trust with the food. You know, you got to find somebody that's trustworthy to deal with the food, right? A lot of things can happen with the food. But the ones in the orange jumpsuit, do I need to tell them that they're sinners normally? No, they're just worried. They're concerned about the degree of their sin, but they're not. There's no air about them. They know they're wearing an orange jumpsuit, and so we don't have to spend time on that. That's not what Jesus is doing here. He is showing something entirely different. It's not about a horrible sinner coming home, and it's really not about this self-righteous person coming home. It's about something else. What do you think? Well, let's take off reading a little bit here. We'll just verse 12. The younger of them, this is Luke 15. He said to his father. Right off the start, it's about the father. Right off the start. The younger of them said to the father, Father, give me the share of my estate that falls to me. Now, again, the word share of my estate, he does not use the Greek word, I want a part of the business so I can make it better. He uses a different Greek word, which means I want to liquefy this thing and get out of Dodge. It's a horrible word. And he would, again, if we don't see that, we start saying, yep, the point is, here's a boy who wants to take money and squander it. This is a wasteful young man. This is all about a prodigal son. No, if he uses this strong language, who's he trying to get a rise out of? The Pharisees. See, they're listening in. So he uses a word in the Greek that says, oh, he wants to get rid of all the family business, and he couldn't care less about his dad. If he were dead, he'd be better off. He's trying to show the Pharisees such a horrible picture that they get ticked off and they are incensed. Okay? So that's what he's doing right off the start. To share the estate that falls to me, so he divided his wealth. So it's a shameful request, but look what he's doing. It quickly shifts to who? So he divided his wealth. Who's he? The father. He doesn't get off the father. This is on the father. He stays on the father. You've divided his wealth between them. So he divided wealth, which is that word for bio. It's life. You're living. He divided his source of living with the boys. He laid down his life. You see Christ in this? He laid down his life between them. Who did he give his life to? One or the other? Both. He laid down his bios to both. Now here comes the question, and this is something you get at the end of the story, but we should ask it now because we know the rest of the story, right? But if the Pharisee was sitting here listening to it, they would be saying, you know what I would have done? I'd have slapped that boy in the mouth. And in that culture, that's what he should have done. Backhanded him. You know, if you backhand them, that shows you're less than me. You're pitiful. That's why Jesus said, turn the other cheek, and then they'll have to slap you with the inside of their hand, which makes you equal with them. And so this is the whole idea. Smack and then turn the other cheek. And what do you get? You get a smack that somebody gives you that doesn't smack you with, you're lesser than me, you're equal with me. They would have said, smack the taste out of that boy's mouth. That's what they would have said. Now, what does the father do? He just gives him what he wants. That's crazy. They would have said, okay, that's shameful. Shame on that dad. Shame on that way of thinking. Right? This is not about the prodigal son. This is about the mindset of a person who would say, here's how it should be done, God. Do it my way. Are you getting into this? Where this is all about the Father and the Pharisees listening in, and how the religious leaders of Israel have a way of thinking that is so wrong but seems so right. They would have said, hey, doesn't the Bible say honor thy father and thy mother? That's what they would say, right? And they would take that to a degree and say, you know what, that boy should have got a shot in the mouth. You ever see the movie Medea? You ever see that? She'll pull a Glock out of her purse and start running around with it like she's going to shoot somebody. Oh, you didn't say that. I got a Glock Medea. Yeah, Diary of a Mad Black Woman. I think somebody Perry plays that. Tyler Perry plays that part. Well, she runs around with a gun in her purse, and she's just going to shoot anybody that badmouths her, right? And that's the idea I get. I get this whole Medea thing that you better not talk to me that way, and that's the way these guys would have been thinking.
Now, at this point, does the older son get the 2/3 of the estate? I know somewhere in Deuteronomy it talked about
That's
the
right.
older son gets
2/3.
2/3.
Mm-hmm. He gets twice as much as the younger.
Would he have gotten that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but of course he would have. Yeah. So how does it work? Here's how it works. It's hard for us to relate. Do y'all come from family business? Y'all have anybody help run the family business?
I came from a farm.
Yeah. Yeah. You did?
80 acre farm.
Yeah. Well, like the Hollingsworths and the Everetts, they can relate to that, a family business, because that's how it would have been done. So they would have said, okay, Tyler, you get this portion of the land to put your house on. Luke, you get this one. Sally, Abby. Back then, Sally and Abby wouldn't have got much, but that's what it would have been like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So these boys get their stuff.
Brother so angry.
Yeah.
If he has received 2/3 of something.
Well, what did the younger boy do?
Well, he went off.
Yeah, because if the younger brother would have used the estate the way it was supposed to, it would have benefited all of them. Yeah. Yeah. So what he was doing was, even though he had, it seems like he got his 1/3, almost like let's say there's $300,000. Like he gets 100,000, the boy gets 200,000. That's not how it works. It all stays intact, but he manages his part and he gets the dividends off of that. But the total amount makes the property so valuable. They're building an asset for the future because of synergism. It might be, this is crude, but it might be that I know Kevin deals with this too. At the city, they would, if they're going to do a job in the city, they'd like to have. It'd be nice if the equipment could just be right there instead of pulling all the equipment out, bringing the equipment back in. And be nice if you could just do some jobs right there with the equipment. Think about how that would have been with the brothers. You could work the land and you could take care of the animals, use the same buildings, use the same equipment and so on and so forth, use the same laborers. It just works better. But that's not what the younger brother wanted to do. He did the unthinkable. And then what does he do? When it says here that he gathered everything, again, we miss the. Yeah, well, that's the point, isn't it? Because we don't have words to capture this. But the son gathered everything together. What that means is he took his estate, the part of his estate, and he found someone to buy it. He gathered it together. So what he would have said was, here's my animals. Mm-hmm. Here's the part of the buildings that I own. Here's the part of the land that I own. And he summed it all up. He gathered it together. And he got the value of that piece. But you don't do that. And then he went out and found a buyer and said, would you like to buy my portion? And then what would happen is when the dad died, whoever bought it then would take over control of that 1/3 of the land. It messed everything up, right? They wouldn't be with the family. They wouldn't be a part of the family. They just, what he did was he just blew generations of family business. He just threw it in the commode.
Probably for dimes on the dollar, too.
Dimes, yeah, absolutely. And you read a little bit of that history, read some commentaries. That's what you'd have had to have done, because anyone that was going to buy it, I said, okay, so I want to do that with my property, let's say. And I go to John and I say, John, you want to buy some part of my estate? He says, yeah, sure, I'll take it. How old's your daddy? And obviously this boy would have been somewhere in his teens, because he would, if he's just now asking for it, he'd have been a young fella. So the dad would have been young. So I'd have said, John, would you like to buy it? And John says, yeah, I would. How old's your dad? That's the first question. Why is he asking that? Why would he want to know how old my dad was?
Oh, my dad is gone.
Yeah, that's right. So the price goes down the younger the dad is, because it's going to take longer before he procures it.
Yeah.
He won't get access to it, so the price goes down, but he'll say, sure. It's almost a little bit like a pawn shop, almost, you know, almost a little bit, but it's called futures today. You can buy some futures. You got somebody that starts a business, and boy, it's a great business. You just know it's going to do gangbusters. I don't know what it is. You know, maybe years ago there would have been somebody that had a little hamburglar picture and had a little hamburger, and they said, yep, I'm going to start a place called McDonald's. And you're like, well, I don't know about that. And they fell on hard times, and they said, hey, would you like to buy a future stock, futures? You say, yeah, sure, I'll buy some. Where's the owner? Well, he's over there, and he's hobbling around on a cane, and he can't hardly get around anymore, right? And he's 95, right? You're going to pay top dollar, Mr. Hamburger, right? You're going to pay top dollar, right? But what if he's 35? He's 40. It's going to be a long time, right? So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you this much, and I'm going to have to wait 40 years, right? It probably is going to go to my kids. So I'll buy some futures. Well, that's what he would have had to have done. And we know by the context that it would have had to have been next to nothing, because he's young, the dad was young. So this adds to what a Pharisee's hearing. A Pharisee, Jesus is just piling it on to get the Pharisees so angry with this guy. This dad is such a what? What is he? A wuss. Yeah. Yeah. That's what he's doing. He's wanting these guys to say out loud what they think the dad is. That's what he's trying to do. What a wuss. How ignorant. What a pushover. What a gullible, what a shameful man this is. He doesn't even know the difference between right and wrong. How horrible is he? They don't. They miss love. Jesus is going to get them to say things about the dad. He's sucking them in. He's letting them say out loud what they think is right. And they're going to say it every time he adds something else to the story. And he's going to have these Pharisees cutting down God before it's over. When he gets to the end, they will have ripped the loving, compassionate, gracious, wonderful God that they say they serve. They ripped him apart. This is the pinnacle of Jesus's attempts at giving a parable to zinger these Pharisees. There's nothing else left when he gets done with this story. And any of us who may creep into self-righteous attitudes, we all do it. We will continue to do it. There's an enemy out there, and that's, he might not get us to go live with the prostitutes, but he will get us the other way. He'll get us on the other end of the spectrum, And, yeah, right. He'll get us to live right next to God and hate him. God, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. Why? That's a terrible idea. but he's right. Remember, the older son is right next to God, but he doesn't love him. He doesn't get him, but he's right next to him. The younger son is as far away as he can get as fast as possible. It uses the word quickly, doesn't it? He would have had to have liquefied that stuff and got out of Dodge, because just as soon as the community heard about it, what would they have done? Oh, they'd have got a hold of him, right? He'd have needed a casket for sure, right? They won't tolerate it, all right? They would have smacked him themselves when they heard what he had done. It's just a small village. They would have known, right? Okay, so he went on a journey into a distant country. So when he gathered everything together, he took his cash, he went into a distant country, and that's all that needs to be said to rile up the Pharisees further. Every single one of these is trying to rile the Pharisees. It's not trying to get us to use this illustration to tell some awful sinner that Jesus loves them. You can use it that way, but that's not what he's doing, because this audience is a Pharisee. That's his audience. He doesn't have to tell this story to get the tax collectors and the sinners to come. They're coming already. But he's talking to the grumblers that are wanting to catch him, right? So he's driving them crazy. You know they're waiting for him to say, and then the dad wised up and smacked the fool out of that boy. Right? Isn't that what they're waiting on? When is this dad going to step up? What kind of dad is this? Right? So he's got them incensed. He says, then the boy goes to a far country. Oh, now he's done it. He's gone to the Gentiles. Now the dad will write him off. Now the dad will say, you weird creepo, we're not going to have you in our house. You're done in this household if you think you're going to go. Because here's what we miss again. If he goes and he spends his money in the Gentile nations, if he liquefied the estate in a roundabout way, who did he just sell his estate to? He took the money from the estate and he used that money in a far country with who? Dirty, nasty Gentiles. Those dirty Gentiles, right? So can you imagine what the here's what I guarantee you, and I wasn't there, but here's what would have. All right, here they are. Here's the Pharisees. He's tapping his pen. He's listening. All right, I don't know if I can do this anymore. This guy has lost his ever-loving mind. And then he says, then he went to a far country and he spent all his money with the Gentiles. This is exactly their reaction. Okay, that's it. I can't take this anymore. He did what? He did what? You can just see him. And that's probably not a very good acting job. I'm not a great actor, but he's building it up to the point where they are going to pull their hair out if Jesus doesn't say this dad must have had some sort of mental problems. If he doesn't come out and say, yeah, and the dad turned out to be a rascal himself. This story has to take a turn, but it doesn't. He says, verse 14, of course it says 13 that he used it with loose living. Can you see him? The picture Jesus has now? He shows up. He's like the new fat cat. He's come in with the fancy duds. He's got the sports car, I guess a sports camel, and bad Leroy Brown. Right, that's the picture. Yeah, he comes in. He's got. Remember back in the day with the giant white collars? They were huge. Don't laugh. I've seen some of y'all's pictures from long ago. All right. Especially Kevin over there. I saw Missy put some stuff on there with some duds he had on back in the day, right? I should have brought one, right? Remember those gigantic collars? Oh, they're huge, right? Definitely. You could have hid stuff under those collars. Like you could have just hid. It was huge. Nothing like this. It's been 5 times that size. And he walks into town, and he is Mr. Cool, right? And he's living it up. And he's just getting the Pharisees to just be incensed with this guy's wasteful living. Verse 14. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. Now, what do you think a Pharisee says to that? Good. Whew. Okay. All right. Okay, Jesus. Now this is making sense. What's going to happen next is, yeah, he's going to die. What's going to happen next? He's going to catch a dreaded disease and get what's coming to him. Yep. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. You paying the piper now, buddy. You have done it now, right? And so he says, a severe famine occurred in the country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out. Wait a minute, you're going to give this guy some intestinal fortitude to survive. I don't know about that. He goes to one of the citizens, so he's going to go to a Gentile. He sent him into his fields to feed the swine. So when he says here that he hired himself out, that's not exactly what happened. The word here is, that word hired is not a word that we use in this way. What he did was he said, I'm not taking no for an answer. Yeah. Glued. That's what it is. Yeah. Have y'all ever been anywhere where there was like true poverty? Have you seen a picture of it on, Yeah. Those kids, have you seen them? There's it's sad that I've never been. I've never been to those places. I've heard people talk about it where those kids come running. You see, there's you remember Harrison Ford played Indiana Jones, and there was the one where all the kids were just, wherever he went, the kids just surrounded him. They wanted his whip, they wanted his hat, and there was probably 50, 100 kids that just came out from between the buildings and surrounded him when he was trying to go down the street. And I remember that imagery because the kids were starving. They had nothing, and they were looking for, and this is the imagery. He wasn't going to detach himself. He was going to follow that man until that man gave him a job to do. He was going to die, glued to him, because nobody would do what? Nobody would. So he sent him into the fields to feed the swine. Nobody would give him anything. He goes in to feed the swine. Of course, what do the Pharisees think about pigs? So you see from beginning to end so far, this is about getting the Pharisees riled up. This is what this story is about, because they're the leaders of Israel and they see the Father incorrectly, as you said. They don't see the love of God. They see the rule keeping. They see the commandments. They've even made the commandments their own. They made their own ethical way of living, their own law. And so they're blind leading the blind, Jesus says, right? They're blind. Okay. So it says, verse 16, and he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating. You can look that up. It has any other translation? Yeah, there you go. Carob. Yeah. It has zero nutritional value for a human. It's of no use to eat it. It does nothing for you. It's like corn. Okay? But to a pig, it's priceless. Yeah. Yeah. Carrot. Well, I thought a syrup of some kind, but yeah, it's a carrot. But I'm not sure. It's a really good question. Maybe somebody on YouTube knows carob. Maybe let us know. Yeah, that's yeah. And again, we don't catch it here. This is what Kenneth Bailey, if you want to do a guy that he's about dedicated his life to this story, Kenneth Bailey, Bailey. But he writes some great articles. I've got them here I've got 3 of them he's written on Luke 15. They're really good. And it has a lot of what I'm trying to bring out here. It has the outlines from this morning, I think, that I was trying to show you guys. He does a better job at it than I do. So, but what he says is, don't miss this. He says that when he says, I would gladly fill my stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, it's not that he's saying, I want that food. He's saying, if I were a pig, I'd be better off. Because those would do a human no good. He's not saying, I need to eat those pods. If he were a pig, he would have plenty to eat. Okay, have we ever said anything like that? Well, if I was just this, then I would be better off, right? Oh, we might say this: if I were a bird, I could get a bird's eye view. We use that phrase. I could see better. I could get around better if I were a bird. It'd be neat to soar like an eagle, that kind of thing. At this point, he's actually saying, I'd be better off as a pig. Why is Jesus? That just seems so bizarre. Look, that would be so overkill to try to tell a sinner, yeah, this guy was so bad he wanted to be a pig. A pig's the worst animal. That's not what he's doing. What he's doing is he's getting the Pharisees ticked off. He's getting them so incensed. If he can paint this boy as wanting to be a pig to survive, a Jewish boy wanting to be a pig, when the father reacts the way he's about to react, what it'll cause the Pharisees to do is exactly what he's wanting to get the Pharisees to do. The zinger will have a better zing if he does it this way. Okay? So that's the point of this story. So verse 17, because it says in the verse end of 16, and no one was giving anything to him. Right? Now, would a Pharisee give him anything? So what are they going to say when the Father does? He's insane. It's foolish. Right. What he's doing is he's saying, remember in John 8 when he said, I am God? He said, I am. Jesus said that to them. And then they said, you've lost your mind. You're out of your mind. Jesus is getting them to say about this Father what they're saying about him. That's what he's doing. Guys, this is all you've been doing to me ever since I showed up. I've been loving you. I'm about to lay he's about to, he's by chapter 19, then he turns toward Jerusalem. He's going to go die on a cross for them. He's the Lamb that takes away the sin of the world. And all they have done is tell him his business. So he came to his senses in verse 17. And he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread? But I am dying here with hunger. Now, what's a hired man? We talked about that this morning. What's a hired man? Now, it says he came to his senses. I do not believe that he got saved out here in the field. I don't believe that. He's got a ways to go yet. But he looked at his situation and he said, I would be better off as one of my father's hired men. Now, there's a lot in that. Why does he think that that's a good idea? Well, because the hired men have more than what? More than enough bread. But I'm dying here of hunger. So what's he saying about his father? Yeah. Right. And all he would do is, all he's required in the law to do is give them enough for that day. But how much does he give them? More than enough. What's that boy saying about the dad? Generous. What's Jesus saying the Pharisees ought to realize about God? He's very generous. You're missing the generosity, the compassion, the love, the grace, the mercy of God. You all are legalistic. You're throwing the gauntlet down, right? The gavel, I guess, is a better way to say it. You've got all these rules. That's not God. That's not God. Yeah. How long will it take you to come to your senses? Yeah. Yeah. How long? Right. Yeah. Why am I? I don't have to do that. And they look at their circumstances. So there is a great, we skipped over it, but who brought the famine? Who allowed the famine? God did. There's something stuck in there, isn't there? We do things as sinners, we do enough on our own, don't we? To screw things up. But then the Father did what? If you think about God, he brought a famine to do what for the boy? Bring him to his senses. Romans chapter 1, if you read that chapter, you remember what God did. He turned them over to their desires. He let them go. He gave them what they... Remember when Israel asked for another king? Did he say, no? He said, okay, he's going to enslave you and destroy your entire country. He tells them what's going to happen. He says, okay, then I will give you a king. He give them Saul, right? If they'd have chose David, but they chose the toughest, biggest, and what did Israel say? We want to be like the nations, right? Yeah. So God always he does it out of love, right? He lets us go into our own way. Freedom of choice. This is his permissive will. Yes, he has a perfect will that you can't thwart and you can't change that. Yes, he chose us in Christ before the creation of the world, but he also has a permissive will where we choose things, and he uses that to do what? To help us come to our senses. Yeah. So that's what happens here. He used a famine, and he threw the famine on top of his wastefulness, his sin and shame. He threw the famine in to make sure that he came to his senses. How loving is that? Right? We might ask the question, how horrible is God that he allows such catastrophe? But it's better to ask the question, how awesome is God that he allows the catastrophe? Now, this is something we don't relate very well to, but go to the jail with me sometime, and you'll see the guys that have come to their senses. They're at the end. There's guys looking at 50 years, and they just say, I found God. I had to be incarcerated to be set free. And until I was incarcerated, I never found freedom. I was more in jail outside than I was inside. And so there's that coming to your senses, and they firmly believe that, yes, they did a lot on their own to cause their situation, but then they see how God then caused a famine to come. There's no, where are my friends? Where's my family? Where did people go in my life? How did this happen? How can things get worse? And then they end up worse. Yeah. And God shows up in their life. Otherwise, I had a friend that said, I didn't even, this is strong. I'll warn you right now. So this is a strong way to put it. But he said, I would rather my daughter live a life of prostitution and find Jesus Christ than to live a life of extravagance and spend eternity in hell. Now that's oh, it hurts, right? That's a hard thing to say. Do you get what he's saying? Yeah. Yeah. Would we be willing to say such a thing? You know, here's what and I'm going to go ahead and jump to it because we got like 3 minutes, but I want you guys to read the story and think of this, because this is what floors me. It floors me. Do we realize that in order for God to have the joy of verse 7 of this chapter, verse 10 and verse 32, and then of course Jesus in Luke 10, he was, when Jesus had such exuberant joy was when the 70 came back, right? So joy, 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 all through the book of Luke. What does he rejoice about? Well, Luke 19:10, he came to save the lost. That's what he's rejoicing. That's what brings God joy. But let me introduce you to a thought, and I want you to take it with you. In order for God to experience such awesome joy when a lost person is saved, what must God experience on the flip side? Yeah. Yeah. Did the Father plead with the Pharisee? Did he, if they are indeed the Pharisee, the older son, did he go out and plead with him? And did the older son give him a sloppy wet kiss and say, oh, thank you, Father? No, we know how the story ends. Jesus leaves it open-ended, and then they literally, think of, just for a minute. I know this is, this is sort of PG-13 right now, right? Well, maybe not even that bad anymore because of what TV has on TV, but envision for just a second, the son is standing there, the older son with the father, and we'll get to it next week or the week after, and the son is going to begin to tell the dad all the things he's done wrong, and he's chiding him. And in that, we'll take it apart, That's what I'm going to do March 31st. We're going to get to that and take it apart on the reaction of the older son. But Jesus ends it after a good chiding of the father. He tells him, you did this. I didn't so much as even get a goat. And you did this for my younger brother. How insane are you? Right? Okay. Well, after that, then you would expect to have, and the son stormed off. Or the father said, but I love you, and all that is mine is yours, is what he tells him. It always has been. Come into the home and celebrate with us. Let me ask you something. Is the celebration about the younger brother coming home? Trick question. Is that what it's about?
Well, that would be a subplot, but it also shows the ignorance of the older son.
Yeah.
And the lack of.
Why the celebration, though? What's the celebration about? Because if you read in Luke and you start from the beginning all the way up to now, what has it been about? Verse 7, verse 10, verse 32 in this chapter. The lost is found. Now take me one step further. We want to close with this one, but we got to get to it. Why is there a celebration? Why are the people celebrating? Okay. Yeah, they do. That's true. But how did that sheep come home? Shepherd went and got him. How did the coin get found? She worked hard, went and got it, right? Did the work. The woman did the work. Did the coin do anything?
No.
Did the sheep do anything? Are they celebrating this boy? Not really. What they're celebrating is the compassionate father. That's what the celebration is for. The community has come together to celebrate how loving and gracious and compassionate this father is to his children. That's what the rejoicing is about. That's what's so amazing. Now, if this is true, and I think it is, and we'll unpack it more in the next couple of weeks to show that. I think we can show that in these verses. But that boy out there in that courtyard did not take it well when he found out his younger brother was having a celebration. They were having a celebration that his younger brother that was dead is now alive. And it was all because that boy would have never made it to the house if it had not been for the mercy of the father. And the father is the one they're celebrating, his compassion. Now, if that boy we know plays the part of the Pharisee then, if you think in your mind, the father turns around and says, let's go in, son. And the son picks up a stick and beats him to death with it. That's how this ends. That's what we call the cross. That's what happened, was they literally beat Jesus, didn't they? Isaiah says he couldn't tell if he was a man or not. He was beaten so badly. So that's literally what the older son does, is beats the dad within an inch of his life. So in order for God to have the rejoicing of the lost being found, what must the dad experience? Yeah. For how long? For eternity. Right? The one son's eternally home. The other one is eternally out. But God lives with that for eternity. The father has to live with the pain of the rejection forever. You can't have one without the other. And so our God is willing for all of eternity to take the scourge of the older brother for the salvation of the younger one. How compassionate is God that he would take that forever and ever and ever. You know? So, yeah, the point is, Pharisees, look at the compassionate Father and tell me how you're going to respond. And so hopefully that's helpful to fall more in love with and rejoice more with our God who killed the fatted calf for the Son. But that we'll get into that more, what the fatted calf represents and all that. I think you have an idea, but we're going to get there. But one more time, do you think that he loved the younger son any more than the older son? No, he didn't. He loved them the same. And the one accepts the mercy and the other doesn't because of self-righteousness. But it's for the sake of the Pharisee. It's not, those sinners are already coming to him. We already know that. They come to him one after the other. In fact, Matthew threw a celebration, didn't he? A big party. So that's not an issue. The sinners are coming to him left and right. The prostitutes are coming to Jesus. He's surrounded by the sinners. The issue are the leaders that represent God. And so they're the ones he's telling the story for.
We have sacrificed so much to keep that law.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
We have given so much to you. And isn't that what the older son says?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll take that apart too.
Pharisees.
Yeah, the older son would say, I've been with you this whole time. The older son even says, I never did anything wrong. I never messed up. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys very, very much. And if anybody on YouTube wants to get a hold of me, 270-331-7319, 270-331-7319.